Greetings all, Dr. Raphael X here with another video, always promoting Catholic intellectualism and especially promoting authors and their books, the new books, right? And here today we have Mr. Bobby Angel, who is here promoting his new book, very interesting on postmodernism. And it's not just any book written on postmodernism, it's a very practical guide. But before anything else, let us begin with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, please subscribe, click on the like button, notifications button, share this video, leave a comment, all that good stuff. Well, Bobby Angel's here, and he is a writer. He also works or works in the Catholic Psych Institute, and he's here to promote his book on postmodernism. Thank you for coming on, Bobby.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. And the book actually just arrived in the mail for me today as the day we're recording, so I'm getting to physically hold it for the first time, which is
It hasn't
always,
come out yet. That's right. It hasn't come out. Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot to.
yes, it comes out this month, and but I got like the advanced author sneak copy. So the Postmodern Predicament, it was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, if you can tell us a little bit what brought you, a little bit about your background, what brought you to write that book, and I just want to briefly mention, it's really separated into. There's a lot in there. Like you go through the history of philosophy basically in the first section, talk about postmodernism, and then you have that practical part of the chapter of what to do. How do we recover from this mess? So why is postmodernism a mess? I guess there's a lot to talk about, right? We could do a whole series on your book alone. But really, if you want to give the gist to the audience of it, so to kind of promote it.
Yeah, philosophy may elicit a number of reactions in the viewer or the listener of total boredom to why should we care to intrigue. And philosophy means the love of wisdom by definition. And all of us have a philosophy, whether we would call it that or not. We have an approach to what does it mean to be a good person? What is the point of life? What am I really seeking? What is the beautiful? All these are the questions of philosophy, which are really our capacity to reason as human beings and to ask that question, why? Why am I here? And so these are the real, it's not just an academic ivory tower discipline that is so that's kind of what it's become in a way, or what we assume it is. It's just kind of so pie in the sky, or just like people like we're so obsessed with the practical today. Is it useful? If it's not, then discard it. Or, we've so fragmented matter from spirit. It's like if you want to believe in religion or spiritual things or philosophy, that's nice. That's a nice little private hobby. But over here in the real world, we got more important things to do. It's like, well, listen, that itself is a philosophy because what we've inherited is this very materialistic, like bifurcated matter versus spirit way of seeing the world. And so we have this great poverty where we are spiritual beings, and we seek that out in one way or another. So I was gifted, like in brief, I was gifted this lens by which to see philosophy and the history of philosophy through. I was discerning the priesthood for a number of years before I ultimately felt called to marriage. But in our training, we're learning philosophy, which was confounding because it's like we're trying to be priests. So why are we having to learn philosophy? But in the Catholic tradition, we start with philosophy before we get to theology. And I worked at an all boys Catholic school for about 10 years. And in my later years, I was blessed to be teaching the senior level curriculum, which was philosophy. So it was this, I was given this gift and this full vision of the philosophical history. And then the furnace of trying to teach it to 17, 18-year olds. Why should I care? What's important here? So I feel like I cut my teeth on that and realized, um, if I can help present it in a way, in a really pastoral and readable way, and I've seen things out of the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years that it's like this postmodern fruit in full bloom. And a lot of people I saw around me that were just so confused, like, what is going on and how did we get here? And what do we do about it? And feeling like I had this book within me, if I can put the pieces together to try to at least encourage people who don't have a philosophical background, how do we get here? And then what do we do about it?
Right, right. No, it's really interesting, and the fact that you write about postmodernism, I mean, it's a tricky topic because it's like everything goes. It's really something
Yes.
undefinable. So can you talk about like because in and when you get to the section of the part two, when you get into postmodernism, which I like how you properly call it the mess because it is a mess. I mean, that's it's like a little bit of everything. Everything goes, like I said. Can you kind of tell us basically what is postmodernism? Why is it a mess? Why is it what is it?
It's a mess by definition. Like that's the point of it. It's not
Right.
supposed to be ordered. It's a reaction against modernity, which is which prided itself on the empirical, what we can put under a microscope, what we can order. We do all that, we'll get utopia. And we can discard God, we can discard all these nice religions of the past and just have pure humanistic progress. That didn't happen. We had probably the bloodiest century the world has ever known in the 20th century, two world wars, genocides. And so a lot of kind of the fruit of this, like these hopes and dreams gone wrong, out of the which you got kind of a nihilistic angst, the cynicism of like the 1920s and the 30s, and they've just kind of gone underground and continued manifesting in this like reaction against all of that. So it's what I hope in the book is also to explain in a pastoral way. Listen, all of it makes sense. All of it, when we put in the context of how we have been hurt, what we're reacting to, we always go overboard. We really find it difficult as humans to stay in the middle. Like, we react like totally opposite way instead of trying to find what's the nuanced middle we can go to here. And I pull from Abigail Favali's book, The Genesis of Gender, to help define what do we even mean by postmodernism. She says, to put it simply, it's a worldview that sees reality in terms of narratives that are created by human beings rather than an order of objective truths that can be discovered by human beings. So the postmodern spirit reflects a deep skepticism towards meta narratives, collective explanatory narratives that give an overarching account of reality. The ancient world, the medieval world, and this for me was a big light bulb moment of realizing, hey, the people in before us didn't see the world the way we do. The people of the ancient time periods, the medieval time periods, they saw the world in a much more enchanted way, in an ordered way. And in when you take philosophy in a secular, like undergraduate setting, what you usually get is the ancients, so Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then nothing happened for 1500 years until we get to the Enlightenment.
Yeah, right.
Then the story continues on. And I always thought, like, there's a missing piece here. And it wasn't until my seminary training that I actually was given that, like, listen, the medieval time period is not just this pejorative dark ages. Like, this is where you get philosophy and theology coming together. Like, this is a great synthesis that you can't just easily untwine into these compartmentalized philosophy over there, theology here for Augustine and for Aquinas and Anselm. Like, it was a whole harmony, it was a whole symphony together of faith and reason.
Uh,
And it wasn't this like what we have now is like reason is over there, religion's over here, and you guys don't play nice together. But it's like, no, that is just it that impoverishes the human person.
right,
Um, but this mindset too of there is an objective reality of truth, goodness, and beauty that my happiness lies in conforming myself to. Like the Christian thing of bringing Athens and Rome together. We can learn from each other. Theology builds upon philosophy.
right,
And so to ask questions and to recognize, yeah, where in me has gone askew by sin, what has been darkened in my intellect or my will, and how do I raise that up through the grace? You know, divine revelation comes in and Jesus helps supplant what is ultimately lacking. I can bring myself pretty far, but of my own volition, I can't go all the way. So this too is where John Paul II called faith and reason like two wings of a bird.
right, right, right.
And now in the next piece in modernity, you kind of have have these stirrings of the Enlightenment. You have a whole lot of changes that I try to just kind of again put yourself in that worldview of the 1400s, the 1500s, where everything's changing. Like with the printing press and the Reformation, the one church is suddenly getting fractured. For the European continent, there's a whole other continent over there we never knew about.
That's right. That's right.
The whole like heliocentric theory and feeling like we were the center of the universe, but now that's in question. So there's a lot of changes happening. There's also this just kind of unfettered belief again in human progress. And we're clearly advancing in technology and in independence and overthrowing these monarchies, and there's nowhere to go but up. So there was this unbridled spirit of like we're throwing off the old and we can just move in a human-centered avenue of progress. And like I said earlier, the it didn't we didn't hit utopia. And so the postmodernism is a large reaction to all these promises that didn't come true. And well, we've ejected God, we've cut off the flowers from the root of civilization, and now it's wilting. And now we're questioning again, it's not about me conforming to objective reality, it's I want reality to conform to me. And you hear this language all the time. Well, like, well, my truth is,
That's right. Yeah.
it's my truth against your truth, which always makes my eye twitch a bit because it's like it's either true or it's not.
Right. Right. Right.
And but it's all language. Like there is no objective. Like if you want to believe in God, that's great, that's nice. But like for me, so it is postmodernism is inherently fluid. It is always changing. And when you try to argue against its positions, it's like you're not playing the same game. So if
Right.
you're trying to approach it with pure logic, if you're trying to approach it with reason, it's not about being reasonable. It's about, just kind of, it's about irony. And it's about just either succumbing to nihilism or just leaning into the absurdness,
That's
where
right.
we are just rewriting reality based on what I want it to be. I can rewrite male and female based on what I want it to be, or this garbage is art and art is in the eye of the beholder. So it's like, why is modern art so ugly? That was one of my, I'm going to stop here. I can ramble, having used to have been a teacher. I have the gift of rambling, so you're going to have to cut me off. But one of the fastest
Right.
ways that I got my students' attention was through art and architecture, is just showing them, look at these buildings from look at these Gothic cathedrals. Look at the art that was produced in the Renaissance. And now look at the art that's been produced in the last 100 years. Look at the architecture that's been produced. Look at the brutalism of the Soviet Union. Like it's informing us. Like our values, our philosophies spill out into our art and architecture. And likewise, they're also telling us something about the human person. Either we are beings meant to be elevated that have meaning and purpose, or it's just all about utility and what's useful and who cares.
Yeah. No, it's interesting you mentioned that 'cause I remember I had a professor who said that really art is the interpreter of the times, and then philosophy is kind of it takes its time to catch up, but it's the artwork. So that's those number one things that archaeologists would go to say, oh, the times were kind of like that. So that's spot on, and also I you just reminded me when I took a class on postmodernism, and that's how I was introduced to it, and the teacher actually said he was criticizing rationalism. So I was like, wow, this is great stuff. But then he was coming at it from an angle of like of nihilism, basically, of totally degrading reason. So I was like, wait a minute, this is kind of weird. So it's right, it is a nihilistic because it's as Benedict the XVI said, not only do we do is reason rejected, but even faith is rejected. It's like a nothingness, a total nothingness. But what I find interesting in postmodernism is that you do see and I want to ask you about this. You do kind of allude to it in your book, but I want to ask you because you do see, I have some books on Protestants kind of opening up to postmodernism, trying to allow like a fideist bent to postmodernism. Because postmodernism reject reason, fine. Because a lot of the, at least traditional Protestantism, they would actually reject reason too, following in the footsteps of Martin Luther, who said philosophy basically was witchcraft. So. Um, is there and there's also within Catholicism postmodernism is postmodernism antithetical to Catholicism, or is it a obviously from what we said it seems like the answer is obvious, but is there an opening to postmodern? Is there some type of dialogue, which dialogue I guess essentially can have dialogue, but can is it a philosophy that can be in harmonized with Catholicism? Because there is philosophical pluralism in sound pluralism in Catholicism, but can postmodernism be within that Orthodox Catholic orthodoxy?
Really, really great questions and thoughts. I think we're all living in the postmodern time period. Like that's what we've inherited. So I do think we have to understand it, to dialogue with it, to lead people out of it. Like to acknowledge the fact that, it's not all wrong. The fact that there is pushback against pure reason and pure rationalism and trying to put us in these kind of the scientism boxes of only what science says is true, and we can attain happiness through just pure reason and rationalization. Like, well, that's not correct. Like that has led us askew over and over again, and we are more than just what we can fit under a microscope. So I do think, to the postmodern credit, there is value in reclaiming stories and narratives. And even Jordan Peterson has talked about this, like the importance of seeing ourselves in a story and making sense of the world through narrative and storytelling. Jesus himself often teaching in parables and stories, knowing like there's something in that just clicks for us. So I think there's value in that. And even just kind of it's that pastoral phrase, meet people where they are and seek to understand before you attempt to teach. And Pope Paul VI said this too. It's we listen more to witnesses than teachers. And if we listen to teachers, it's because they're first witnesses.
Mhm.
So there's got to be a willingness to hear out, how are you doing? Like what's going on in life? Like give me, before I come at you with the hammer of truth and how you should behave, I want to show an interest in you as a person. And then get the pulse of what's going on in the hopes of one beggar telling another beggar where the food is. And we can continue to scrounge around in the dumpster, or we can go to the feast. So that's what I'd say to there. The what I saw, and so I devoted, so this was another catalyst for a feeling called to write this book was I think not necessarily postmodernism being incompatible, but certainly one of its methodologies, deconstruction, being incompatible with a proper Christian approach. Because this this is something that I feel is like playing with fire a bit. And we're meant to ask questions. We're meant to ascertain and have a reason for why do we believe what we believe. It is good to ask questions, and certainly in the Catholic tradition, we encourage ask your questions. The church can handle it. God can handle your questions. And there's a plethora of resources on the internet to go and get those questions like answered. It's not just arbitrary. It's not just blind authority. We don't shut our brains off. I had a priest professor in seminary who said Jesus came to take away your sin, not your brain. So therein lies again a piece of the Catholic perspective I want to bring to the table. But the deconstruction, which is this kind of approach to texts and like and narratives by these French intellectuals that has bled into popular culture, I see really has gotten picked up by certain strains of Protestantism, some parts of, in Catholic online circles, but Protestants especially that don't have a magisterium, where there has been abuse or hurt or wounds, I see why they gravitate towards this methodology of deconstructing their faith. And so I want to say that first too, like to the extent there has been hurt, there has been either abuse, spiritual abuse, sexual abuse. It makes sense why you want to question everything. You want to reject and you need to rebuild. But caked into this term deconstruction is the inherent postmodern belief that there is no truth.
Right.
So if you're trying to approach the way, the truth, and the life with the instrument of, but there's no truth, it's like, well, there's a lot of, you're playing with fire.
That's right. That's right. And you mentioned it spot on too before that if there's no truth, you almost automatically fall into a cynicism because really the ultimate value would be power. And actually, it's interesting because you would be cynical automatically without believing in truth, because if someone were to bring up the truth, they're just kind of in their truth according to the postmodern, they're just in trying to impose their narrative. So you see this extreme cynical view that, oh, there's no meta narrative, so you're just trying to impose on me your truth. You're trying to exercise your power over me. So it becomes a very sick view. And I was studying history before. I was trying to get my master's in history before I got a PhD in theology, and I totally left it because it is seeped with postmodernism. There is no meta narrative. There's no true history. Everything's just narratives, and it's just totally infected by this postmodern spirit. Modernist spirit is in the sense that we're interpreting history as just, oh, this comes from a powerful narrative. This narrative has succeeded, we can say prevailed, because it has been more powerful. So again, cynicism throughout everything. So how do we recover from this mess? I think one of your chapters in the last section talks about love, which is interesting. Love and truth go hand in hand. As it would seem as on the surface that relativism would be associated with love, tolerance on the surface, but deep down, no way. The denial of truth is attached to this cynical view, this negativity, hatred ultimately. So if you want to speak a little bit on the recovery of you know, how we recover from postmodernism, if there is a recovery, because now people are talking about postmodernism, which seems to show that the very movement has no substance in it. So it can't even have its own name. It has to be named off what it comes after, or what comes before it. So yeah, if you would like to speak to that, that would be great, the recovery part, because I think that is what a lot of people would be interested in also.
And that's what I found lacking in a lot of the books that I've read about postmodernism is there's some really excellent books out there and some really readable books, but they don't really tell you what to do next. They can explain how we got here and the thinkers and the problems of the strain of thought, but I never found like well, what now? Like a hopeful ending. Because it is we're still in it. We're still making sense of it. And some people want to try to rewind the clock or put the genie back in the bottle, but we can't. We're here. We're in the time that God has called us into. And so we can stand on the shoulders of those who came before us and also have a long view of history because it's so easy to just kind of get stuck in these 4-year election cycle way of thinking instead of realizing, listen, like, especially with the history of church, with the history of the church and Christ, we're thinking in centuries and we're thinking of the heresies that came and went. We're thinking of the times of tribulation and leadership that was great, leadership that wasn't, and to see like this is also the eras in which the saints are born, in which the people that can stand steady and bring love and truth together can do so much good. And so yeah, the first 5 chapters or so of the book are explaining the history of philosophy and how we got here. The middle book is on postmodernism itself and breaking down some of the tenets. And the last section of the book, it gets into a roadmap, not a silver bullet. It's just, from my vantage point, a roadmap of what do we do next to restore. And that is leading by beauty, reclaiming art and architecture, that is loving one another in the genuine sense where it is love and truth. It's not just, as you said, a relativistic you do you approach. Like that really isn't love. Like as a parent, I have to step in and stop my kid if they're going to walk into the street or lick from the toilet or put their hand on the stove. Like the loving thing to do sometimes is to say no. And I think one of the postmodernism shticks is just this like adolescence. It's just like the spirit of adolescence, just meh, like the empathy and like I don't really care and nothing really matters. And I mean that's hip and trendy for a little bit, but it's at some point you gotta grow up. And at some point you have to like take on responsibility. Again, why I think Jordan Peterson has struck a nerve is because it's this call to responsibility and take ownership of your life. And why I think works like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is like always in the water is because there is such a hunger for meaning and purpose. And you see this as one of the most anxious cultures ever and anxious generations to ever live is because we've been cut off from objective purpose and meaning. And the fact that there is a great story, a meta narrative we're all called into, and our life is not meaningless. And as disciples, one of the responsibilities we have is to love, and that is to walk with one another, to listen before we cast stones, and to also call people to the truth. A speaker friend of mine, particularly for men, she's like, we need more brothers and not bros. Like we have plenty of bros. We have plenty of the like, yeah, you do you, man, and I'm not gonna hold you accountable. You don't hold me accountable. Let's just live life and we just stay on the surface. But at the end of the day, we want brothers. We want people that will love us enough to call us out, to want us to be better, to challenge us. And sometimes that's super compartmentalized. Like we see that in the athletic world, we see that in health and fitness, like the rigidity, like the grinding after it. But then when it comes to the other areas of life, like character and virtue, it's like, well, who could be expected to have self-control? Who could be expected to live to a higher standard? It's like us. Like we're not mere animals. And so loving one another is not just being nice. It is also calling people to the truth.
Do you think there's a shift, a cultural uh a shift in society and worldwide, kind of where postmodernism is dying, or do you see it gaining strength? How do you see it? Because it seems like in your book, I'm reading part three, it is kind of losing its steam, but I don't know if that's just my interpretation. But what do you think is happening?
I think it is losing steam in some ways, but I think the ideas that are undergirding it are still here with us and they haven't been answered. So, but again, it can't just be this like eye for an eye thing, or let's just go back to 1776, or let's just go back to pre-Vatican II and that's going to fix everything. It's there were real concerns raised, and we have to also face them. But I think again, when you lead with beauty, when you actually set foot in a beautiful church, it's like, whoa, there's something here. When you experience a beautiful liturgy, you see a like beautiful work of art, it stirs something in you. It's like, that's what I'm meant for.
Right.
When I have, when I am fathered well, when there's been a wound of fatherhood, which a lot of this goes back to at the spiritual level, it's a rebellion against God's fatherhood. You have this whole like the patriarchy being demonized wholesale and masculinity being called toxic wholesale. There's going to be a reactionary movement to that. Have there been abuses? You bet. But what we need really and what we're aching for is healthy patriarchy, healthy fatherhood. And you see this. Nietzsche was presented to me in the seminary as a real John the Baptist kind of character. Like atheists love to claim him and his thought and his whole vibe. But I had a priest professor really paint him in this kind of tragic John the Baptist way. Of he took it to its logical end. Like if God is dead and we have killed him, of course he's going to succumb to insanity,
Right.
which he did. Like it's not just this hip, edgy thing, God is dead. We could do whatever we want. Dostoevsky even knew that. Like, if there is no God, then there's no morality, which means good and evil are just made up words, which means I can do whatever I want, which is a horrible thing if you actually follow that to its conclusion.
That's exactly right. That's why I think most people, I tell my students who I teach also, and I tell them the majority of people are practical nihilists, though they because they don't really arrive at the conclusions, the ultimate conclusions of their beliefs. They just kind of live it, and they're not right really deep persons, we can say. They live on the surface, and if they would take the conclusions of their beliefs, they would despair because it's despairing.
Right.
So it's a lot of this practicality without, it's a lack of depth ultimately. And I think spot on, one of the longest chapters in your last part is a chapter on beauty. And I think that is spot on as the antidote, recuperating the objectivity of beauty. Now, we don't have to agree even within the Catholic tradition, Thomas Aquinas disagreed with Augustine on what constitutes beauty, but we at least have to agree fundamentally. And we almost know this immediately by experience that beauty is objective, that it gives us the aesthetic pleasure, automatic awe, like, wow, this is impressive, this is beauty. So,
Right.
yeah, just want to give you the last word, and also just to my listeners, get the book. The link is going to be below in the comment section because the purpose of the videos is to give you a taste. There's no way we can do justice to a book like this, not even with many series, because there's just a lot. This book has a lot in it. Even though it's not that many pages, it's only like 300, I believe. But it's yeah, maybe it's less. No,
No,
350. It's not even that much.
it's way less than that. It's like
Oh,
130.
I'm sorry. Yeah, 130. I don't know why it's
But
so long, but it's still. I mean, there's a lot in there to unpack. I mean, you go through the history of philosophy. There's a lot in there, which is great. Which is actually not 130 is not bad to read. It's you can read
well,
that.
I wrote it. I hope to write it as a primer that's not going to scare people off.
Right,
And
right.
especially for people that don't love philosophy or don't really see why it's important. This is who I wrote it for. And if you love philosophy, you'll get something out of it.
Oh yes.
But I want it to be very readable and also hopefully a bit of a teaser so people can go deeper and read other authors, dare to read some of the primary sources even of Aristotle and Augustine. And I waded through a lot of postmodern writers and a lot of nonsense. So hopefully you don't have to.
Very good. So, Sophia Press, thank you very much for coming on, Bobby. And maybe next time we'll have you on for your next book that you publish, God willing. And so the book's coming out in a couple of weeks. Link below. And until next time, thanks again. God bless.
God bless.